Daniel made himself indispensable. That was the mistake. Every crisis ended at his desk. Every broken launch needed his approval. Every difficult client eventually asked for him by name. So when a management position opened, Daniel assumed the decision would be obvious. He had solved more problems than anyone else. He understood the product better than the people above him. And the company trusted him with work it would never give to an average employee. But when Daniel asked about the promotion, his manager gave him a compliment that sounded like respect. "We can't move you right now. You're too important where you are." Daniel smiled. Then he went back to his desk and did the work of 3 people for the salary of 1. That is the trap. The company did not reward Daniel's importance. It protected access to it, and many of the hardest working people in the world are trapped by the same sentence. "We don't know what we would do without you." It sounds like power, but if they cannot move you, promote you, or let you leave your current responsibilities, you do not have power. You have become useful infrastructure. An infrastructure is rarely promoted. It is maintained. The dangerous part is that Daniel created this position himself. He answered messages immediately. He fixed problems before anyone else understood them. He protected weaker co-workers from consequences. He kept important knowledge inside his own head, because explaining it would take longer than doing the work himself. At first, this made him valuable. Then it made everyone dependent. And eventually, that dependence became the reason the company could not afford to move him. Daniel believed he was building leverage, but he was building a cage with his own competence. This is why some of the most capable employees remain underpaid for years. They confuse being needed with being powerful. But those are not the same thing. Being needed means the system depends on your labor. Being powerful means the system must negotiate with your choices. Daniel had responsibilities. He did not have alternatives. And without alternatives, responsibility becomes a form of captivity. Look closely at the people who rise inside organizations. They are not always the people who personally solve the most problems. Often, they are the people who make decisions, allocate resources, communicate outcomes, build systems, and make other people capable of solving problems. The trapped employee says, "Give it to me, I'll fix it." The advancing employee says, "Here is why this keeps happening, who should own it, and the system that will prevent it next time." One person becomes the answer. The other person changes the structure. Companies need both, but they do not reward them in the same way. The person who becomes the answer is pulled deeper into execution. The person who changes the structure is invited closer to authority. Daniel did not understand this distinction. When a product launch failed, he stayed until midnight and repaired it. When another launch failed for the same reason 3 months later, he stayed until midnight again. Everyone called him reliable. No one asked why the organization needed a rescue twice. That was the moment Daniel should have stopped being the hero, not because the work did not matter, because heroic effort can hide structural weakness. When one competent person repeatedly saves a broken system, the system receives no pressure to improve. The company begins to rely on the rescue. The manager begins to budget for the rescue. The team stops learning because Daniel will eventually take over. And Daniel's reputation becomes connected to emergencies rather than leadership. He becomes known as the man who can carry impossible weight. So people keep giving him weight. This is the first sign you may be trapped by your usefulness. Your reward for completing difficult work is more difficult work. The second sign is that important knowledge exists only inside your head. People constantly ask you how something works. Projects slow down when you are unavailable. Your vacation creates anxiety. Your absence is treated like a business risk. This may feel flattering, but it also gives management a practical reason to keep you exactly where you are. The third sign is that you are invited to solve decisions, but not make them. Leaders ask for your analysis. They use your recommendations. They bring your work into executive meetings, but you are not in the room when authority, budget, or credit is distributed. Your intelligence moves upward. Your position does not. The fourth sign is that your manager praises your loyalty more than your growth. They tell you that the team needs you, that this is not the right time, that another opportunity will come later, that you are essential to the current project. Months pass, then years. The project changes. The explanation remains the same. You are always too valuable to lose and never valuable enough to move. This does not always mean your manager is malicious. Sometimes the manager is simply responding to incentives. Moving Daniel creates an immediate problem. Keeping Daniel creates no immediate problem. The cost of promoting him appears today. The cost of frustrating him may not appear for another year. Organizations often delay invisible costs and protect visible stability. That is why waiting to be recognized is not a strategy. Daniel had to change the economics of his role, not by threatening people, not by becoming unreliable, and not by refusing to help. He had to stop making his value dependent on personal rescue. The first change was documentation. Daniel began turning private knowledge into visible systems. He recorded why decisions were made. He created repeatable processes. He built checklists for recurring failures. He stopped allowing the company's memory to exist only inside his head. At first, this felt dangerous. If everyone understood what Daniel knew, would he become less valuable? Yes, less valuable in his current form. And that was necessary. Daniel needed to become less essential to yesterday's role so he could become available for tomorrow's role. The second change was training. Instead of immediately taking difficult work away from others, he taught them how to complete it. This was slower in the beginning. Mistakes increased. Daniel felt the urge to take control, but every time he rescued someone too early, he preserved their dependence and his own captivity. So he allowed other people to struggle within safe limits. He corrected their process instead of replacing their effort. Over time, the team became stronger, and Daniel's value changed. He was no longer the only person capable of producing the result. He became the person capable of producing capable people. That is a higher form of leverage. The third change was moving upstream. Daniel stopped presenting himself as the person who fixed design problems. He began identifying why the problems existed before the design stage. He connected user confusion to lost revenue. He connected slow decisions to unclear ownership. He connected recurring emergencies, to incentives and process failures. His conversations changed. Instead of saying, "I repaired the onboarding flow," he said, "We are losing trust before customers experience the product's value. Here is the pattern creating that loss, and here is how we prevent it across every launch." The work became larger than the task, and Daniel became easier to imagine in a larger role. The fourth change was portable proof. Inside the company, everyone knew Daniel was useful. Outside the company, almost no one knew what he could do. That made his value dependent on one institution's opinion. So Daniel began creating ethical, anonymized records of his thinking, before and after examples, decision frameworks, lessons from failed launches, explanations of how complexity destroys trust. He did not reveal confidential information. He made his reasoning visible. This gave his ability a second location. It no longer existed only inside his employer's memory. The fifth change was building external options. Daniel did not secretly plan revenge. He simply began having conversations. He spoke with former colleagues. He helped founders understand problems in their products. He published useful analysis. He learned what the market valued and what language decision-makers understood. Nothing dramatic happened at first. Then one founder asked for advice. When another person invited Daniel into a private discussion, a former colleague referred him to a growing company. For the first time, Daniel could see a future that did not require permission from his current manager. That changed his posture before it changed his salary. He stopped treating every internal opportunity as his final chance. He became calmer in meetings. He disagreed without fear. He asked clearer questions. He stopped volunteering for responsibilities that increased dependency but created no authority. People noticed. Power often appears as confidence, but confidence is frequently the visible result of alternatives. 3 months later, another leadership position opened. Daniel's manager called him into the same office. The conversation began with familiar language. "You know how important you are to this team." But this time, Daniel did not smile and returned to his desk. He explained that the systems were documented. 2 employees had been trained. The recurring launch problems had been reduced. His current responsibilities could continue without his constant intervention. Then he described the role he wanted, the authority required, and the outcomes he would own. His manager hesitated. The old argument was gone. They could no longer say Daniel was impossible to replace. Daniel had deliberately solved that problem. And because he had outside conversations already developing, he was prepared for either answer. That was the moment his usefulness became power. Not when people needed him, when he no longer needed one specific outcome from them. Daniel received the promotion, but that is not the most important part of the story. The important part is that he could have walked away. Being indispensable feels safe because it protects your current position, but sometimes it protects the position from you. It keeps you busy enough that you never build proof, needed enough that you never train a replacement, praised enough that you tolerate stagnation, and tired enough that you never create alternatives. Do not make yourself useless. Make your knowledge transferable. Make your results repeatable. Make your thinking visible. Build people who can continue the work Then move closer to decisions, ownership, and outcomes. The goal is not to become the only person who can carry the weight. The goal is to build a structure that does not collapse when you put the weight down, because being needed is not the highest form of professional value. Being able to choose is. So ask yourself one uncomfortable question. If your company could continue without your constant rescue, would your career finally be free to move? Do not spend your life becoming too useful to promote. Build the system, train the replacement, create the proof, develop the alternatives. Then, make them negotiate with your choices, not your exhaustion.